In today's tutorial, Randy will explain how Create Studio Pro's animation is a video loop. Kinda like what I am in now. Randy, can you break me out of this loop? Randy! I'm begging you, please stop this madness!
This is Randy
And Patrick!
with another Create Studio Pro tutorial. There is a common question I hear from new creators all the time, and that is, can I modify a character's action? That would be so cool if we could, but sadly the answer is no. You see, each character's action is a video, and while you can apply animations and effects to the video, there is no way to control the character's movements. It is possible to lengthen an action, and when you do that, Create Studio will put the video into a loop. I don't know about you, but I find the same arm movements in the talking actions to be quite irritating on a long talking sequence. But with some creativity, you can make the looping action look less monotonous. Keep watching, and I'll show you how. First, we need to understand Create Studio's looping feature, so I will demonstrate it with Jack. The Jack on the left is using the looking around action, and the Jack on the right is using the idle action. At the start of each action, Jack is in the same pose and position. I call this the resting pose. The resting pose is important as that is how you can add new actions to a character, and it will seamlessly flow from one action to another. Most actions start and end with a resting pose, but not all. The obvious examples are when the character is working on a PC. Nearly all actions will transition the character from the resting pose into the action you selected, and likewise at the end of the action, transition the character back into the resting pose. It is easy to determine which actions have the transition. Simply hover your mouse over the name of the action in the timeline until the blue highlight is visible. Then right mouse click. You will see two options, disable starting animation and disable ending animation. Most but not all actions have this starting and ending animation. For example, when I go right-click on the PC action, the option to change animations does not exist. I am going to delete the track with the working on PC action and focus on what happens when we disable starting animation. Notice that the duration of action becomes smaller, but more importantly, Jack is not in his resting pose, but looking up. To demonstrate how the character actions are a video loop, I will also disable the ending animation. As I scrub through the video by manually moving the playhead, I see Jack is looking up to the right, then he points to the left, and then he moves back to looking up to the right. I am also going to note that this clip is 3 seconds and 19 frames long. Duplicate the looking around track, grab the duplicate track, and with your mouse drag it to just behind the original clip. Now, as I scrub from the end of the first clip through the second clip, you'll see it flows seamlessly between the two. To further illustrate that Create Studio's actions are a video loop, I will duplicate the first action again, but this time I will extend the duration to match the same length as the two clips below it. Again, I check the duration of the clip and I see it is 7 seconds and 8 frames, which is good because that is exactly twice as long as the original clip. My hypothesis is that the track on the top will loop through the looking around action 2 times, and to prove that, I will move the playhead through the timeline. If my hypothesis is correct, then we should only see one copy of Jack. There may be times when there is a glitch and you see 2 copies of Jack, but that is due to the computer not being able to keep up. So now we can see that extending a clip will loop the action. At this point, let's experiment and see what happens if the duration does not match a multiple of the original. I will drag the end marker to 5 seconds. Now playing that from the beginning, they start off in the same position, but when I advance the playhead, you can see they are no longer in sync. The Jack in the foreground is going a bit slower than the Jack in the background. So what's happening here? Create Studio is completing the loop in 5 seconds instead of the 3 seconds and 19 frames. So the character is moving slower. That begs the question, will Jack move even slower if the track is stretched to 6 seconds? Well, let's find out. In this case, the Jack in the foreground is moving faster than the original. I admit this surprised me. It turns out that Jack is performing 2 loops. I did investigate to find out Jack completed 1 loop up to 5 seconds and 13 frames, and when the duration was 5 seconds 14 frames or longer, Jack jumped to 2 loops. If I work through some math, I think I can explain this.
Dude, you are putting your audience to sleep. Come on, man, read the room.
Good point, Patrick. I will explain it without math. The key is that no matter how long the action track is, the character will end on a whole number loop count. A fractional loop count cannot exist. Now, we know when the top track extends beyond one default loop, Create Studio Pro will slow down the action so that the action still completes on a whole loop count, in this case 1. As I continue to extend the animation duration, Create Studio Pro will jump from a loop count of 1 to a loop count of 2. The question is there an easy way to find where this occurs? The answer is yes. Put your playhead somewhere in the middle of the first loop. Now, watch Jack closely and slowly increase the clip duration by moving the end marker to the right. There will be a time when you see Jack move suddenly. Bam! Right there is where the loop count switches from 1 to 2.
So what is the big deal? Why is this important?
As I mentioned earlier, I find the repetition movement in some looped videos to be irritating, particularly arm and hand gestures when the character is talking. On the left, Michelle is looping on the default speed, while the Michelle to the right is mixing a slower and faster arm movements. So even though it has the same arm motions in both cases, having the talking action go to different speeds makes the action less monotonous. Now that we know how to speed up and slow down a character's actions, here's how it is applied to Michelle's talking sequence. Start with the talking action. Disable the starting and ending animation. This provides 1 loop of the action at the default speed. Duplicate the action and move it to the end of the original. This provides 2 loops at the default speed. Once again, duplicate the first clip. Move the playhead in the middle of the first clip. Slowly start stretching the clip until you see Michelle's action jump. There. Now back it up a few frames until you see Michelle jump again. Good. Now rename this clip to slower. Duplicate the slower track and let's get it out of the way for a bit and move it right on the timeline. With the playhead back in the middle of the first track, start extending the duration until you see the jump. Now change the name of this track to faster. Now it is a matter of creating a sequence of default, slower, and faster movements to generate speed variation in the talking action. If you need multiple slower movements, use the duplicate option to create them. There you go. That is how to make your talking action less monotonous by varying the speed.
Another technique that I like to do is to use the other talking actions like talking variation and talking and listening, and make jump cuts through the dialogue. Using this method does not depend on changing the speed, but it does rely on having multiple angles of the background.
That is another good one. It makes it look like you are using multiple cameras to shoot the scene. As Patrick said, you will need multiple angles of the background like the home office background, which you can see has 4 images of the same location. Using this method, you can cut the talking action whenever you want to and switch to a different camera angle and then use a different variation of a talking action. This approach is shown here in the timeline of Patrick.
Lastly, if you only have one background, there is another variation of the jump cut, where you zoom in or zoom out each time you want to use a different talking action. In fact, if you zoom in real far, you can get those annoying arm movements out of the frame altogether. Hey everybody, have a good day and happy creating!